So I think our first big topic, and the topics that we would like to cover, include just a general grounding in what is mindfulness. We're all going to talk a little bit about that. The second big topic is what are the developmental issues that one would need to consider if you're going to be working in schools, either by way of implementing a program or developing your own program. And then the third big topic is what are the ethical issues surrounding the context of working in schools and other settings with children. Then we're going to spend very, very short amount of time on our own respective programs just to give you a taste, but I think we're going to be presenting or have materials downstairs later on. And then finally we'll open it to questions that are still out there from our perspective and from your perspective.
What is mindfulness? Well, it's a big question. Mark certainly opened it up for us on the first night. And I think it's really maybe the most important question facing this particular conference right now. So our plan is just to give a little general idea of it. I mean, the Jon Kabat-Zinn definition, which is very well known, is basically paying attention on purpose without judgment or with an open and a curious mind. But just from my opinion on mindfulness, so you know, in the Inner Kids program, we define mindfulness as paying attention with kindness to self, to others, and to the world around us. We'll talk a little more about that later. But I think that the big issue that came up around this conference is just the importance of defining mindfulness, because when I agree with what Mark said about meditation is not necessary to reach this place that we're talking about, to access that, but if everything is called mindfulness, the question is really meditation necessary for mindfulness, not is meditation necessary to reach this connected, interconnected space. And so certainly under the classical tradition of mindfulness, which is what our work is based on, meditation is a necessary component. So I think it's really, really important to know right up front when we talk about things, when we say mindfulness, it is not necessarily the same thing for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So, and I just want to say there's two things. One is we do use this Jon Kabat, when we actually do this mindfulness program with kids, we do define for them what it is, you know, and tell them what the definition is. And we it's always quite interesting. We'll be talking about this a bit, about secular practices and how do you call it, because if you just Google mindfulness, like parents now, just think about Google and Google that. And so we call mindful attention practices. But I do think it's so critical to really, I want to just underline this one point, is to think about what is mindfulness and what it means and how you get to that, what the outcomes are. But really, when someone says you're doing a mindfulness intervention, or I'm doing a mindfulness program in schools, or I'm working mindfulness with kids, to really ask how they're defining it, like really to clarify, well, what do you mean by mindfulness? Because I think a lot of people mean, as we've even seen here, mean a lot of different things.
And I agree very much. And I'd just like to add that the program I'm working on is a derivative of mindfulness-based stress reduction. So we take Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, but just to unpack it a little bit and really center it in sort of the healing modality that it brings, the way that it really helps people. I'm reminded of what Christopher Germer, who I think is a psychologist in Massachusetts, wrote about mindfulness being a construct, a process, and a practice. And that's probably why it's so hard to define. But if you think about paying attention in a certain way, that process of paying attention in a certain way, and you do it over and over again, you know, you come to the conclusion of asking yourself, well, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing this? And it's really, at least classically, to shine a light on the cognitive errors that we all have, the bugs in our system. Basically meaning that with every experience, there's a feeling tone, there's a valence that arises, you know, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And what happens is we attach thinking to that. So we become enmeshed in thoughts, well, I really like that, or I don't like that, I can't stand that. That's the stress I want to get rid of. Or I like you, or I hate you, or whatever it is that we live our lives kind of enmeshed in. And so being able to see those bugs in the system through the mental training of mindfulness is a very important component of what I know I'm trying to do. We'd like to just address some of the developmental issues. Some of you may be thinking about doing this, some of you may be doing it, some of you may be thinking about creating programs. So what are some things that might be really important to consider in working with children and youth? Susan?
And we've basically divided it up, so we'll all talk a little bit about something else. And I was going to talk about language, and I was going to talk about the importance of speaking in your own tone, in your own voice, and in your own words, and in words that the children or the teenagers or the parents can understand. And that really requires a lot of things. It requires understanding the kids in front of you and really teaching to the child in front of you. It requires teaching within the cultural context that you're in. And it also requires, again, building your own practice, because as you build your own practice from the inside out, then you'll be able to articulate that in your own words to kids in a way that's developmentally and grade and age appropriate.
I wanted to talk about social emotional, and one thing is I am a developmental psychologist, so I really have been studying children's social and emotional development for decades. And one of the things, in terms of bringing a mindfulness practice, you have to think of a couple of things. And one thing is I think of the social arena of the classroom, the social context, I mean the school, but of that classroom, and how you approach things. For example, it could be a way to bring together a group of kids together doing some different activities together that are mindfulness-based, but also you have to think about that peer group. And I don't know if anybody has worked with children in middle schools or in upper elementary. If you get that peer group, and if you get one or two children who are snickering, who are the popular ones, it could totally put a kibosh on anything you're trying to do, and how important that is to really be aware of that social context. And also the teacher, of course, I've seen episodes where teachers, in terms of being aware of the social context, know how to approach it, and other ones where it's totally failed because the teacher presented it in a way that the kids just did not buy in and thought it was really really stupid, really, basically. And then the emotion part, we really have to think about two things. One is the positive emotions, the emotional regulation, all the things that can come about from doing some sort of mindfulness-based educational program in the classroom. But there also is something else I want to put out as a bit of a red flag there, is that, as all of you knew, when we were doing these mindfulness practices, and Maria even brought it up, that sometimes when you're being really mindful and attentive and thinking, even that story about the teacher, like thinking about a teacher that was meaningful, there's all kinds of emotions that bubble up. And so as anyone who's doing that, we really have to think about the emotional lives of children. And I think typically we've kind of squashed those in schools, like the emotional, the ideas, the emotions, and all of a sudden you provide this opportunity, and so it really means you have to think about what the emotions that can come up and really be aware of that beforehand.
And I think that if you're going to work with middle school kids and adolescents, which is the group that I'm targeting, there are a whole host of developmental issues that need to be addressed here. And I just want to make a pitch for adolescents, because I really think this is a group that just desperately could benefit from some of these things. And I know I'm biased, but I'm going to say that anyway. And I have a couple of facts really to support it. In the United States now, I think well, not even in the United States. Let's just look at this cultural time that we're living in. Adolescence is a period of great achievement in terms of cognitive development, and in terms of, the development of metacognition and physical vitality increases. And yet the rate of disease and sickness and mental illness and stress and anxiety is extreme. It's extreme. I think there's a 200 to 300% increase in morbidity over the course of adolescence. That's a huge paradox that we're facing. And a lot of researchers now, much to the delight of many, including myself, are really focusing on that sexy brain science, with adolescents, and they're finding that there is something called imbalance theory, such that the parts of the brain that should be in control and able to regulate emotions are woefully inadequate to the parts of the brain that are really turbocharged. And this emotional intensification at adolescence is the highest it will ever be in your lifespan. And you could probably take a moment and think about what it was like to be that thrown off by the emotional intensity of adolescence. And also the fact that cortisol is highest in adolescence, so that many researchers are now calling it a stress-sensitive period. So it's a critical period of development. It's a point when most mental illnesses start, and when anxiety disorders begin. So it's a time where, you know, you might want to think about addressing programs to that group.
Little battery thing.
Okay. So we'd like to move on to the context of schools, having thought about how development might operate very, very, just very in a cursory way. It's not very, comprehensive. But what are some of the ethical and contextual issues that we have discovered in trying to work in settings that are school-based or clinic-based or whatever with kids?
So ethics is a big piece of this, partially because there's not a clear answer. We don't yet have a mindfulness advisory board that has sat down and created best practices that everybody's agreed upon. People are asking for certification programs, but one doesn't yet exist. And so how do we really figure out how to be ethical in the teaching or in bringing people in? And one of the questions that we're asked all the time is how much mindfulness experience is enough experience to teach? And it's a hard one to answer, and right now, since we're talking to people who are bringing this in themselves, I would really say that it has to be a self-assessment process pretty much at this point. And one thing I use when I train teachers to help them assess whether they are ready to teach mindfulness and at what level they might be ready is I ask them to always substitute the word math for mindfulness. And the reason I do this is because mindfulness is a discipline, just like math is a discipline, like science, like reading, like anything else. So if you feel you know enough math to teach calculus, then you would teach calculus. If you think you know enough math to teach addition and subtraction, you can teach elementary school or early elementary math. But certainly if you can't balance a checkbook, I doubt that anybody would feel that they could really go and teach calculus. So in the same way, mindfulness is a contextual activity too. And so we have to, at least in my opinion right now, because I'm going into a lot of schools right now and I'm training a lot of teachers, it's really sweet to say we don't want any teacher teaching mindfulness until they've had, you know, several years of mindfulness practice on the cushion. But there is a reality, there's a lot of co-learning going on here. So for how much practice do you need to teach mindfulness? One of my students actually, I think, said it best. She came to me. I was very strict when I started out. And she came to me and she said, but I'm a preschool teacher and I can play Ba Ba Black Sheep on the piano and I can sing Ba Ba Black Sheep. So I teach my preschoolers that. Why can't I teach my preschoolers breath awareness? Because I've taken an 8-week MBSR course. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, you know what, as long as you stay with your direct experience, and she, by that point, had a really good sense of breath awareness. Remember, she was working with 4-year-olds. It really was similar to Ba Ba Black Sheep. That's different than teaching breath awareness to 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds where a little more complicated issues come up. So how much mindfulness is enough, we don't have a clear answer, but I think you can look to your inner compass and just think of mindfulness as any other discipline. And if you just substitute the word math in there, if I knew this much about math, would I be willing to teach fill in the blank? For me and for some of the people I've worked with, it's been a good exercise.
Thanks, Susan. I have a couple of things that just have arisen for me because I'm not specifically going in and teaching a program. I've been doing the research on the program. So I first have to tell you there's no research at all that examines if you need a mindfulness practice or how much you need to teach a program. So there's nothing out there yet. So we don't know. So my question is, it's an empirical question. We don't know. But I do think it's interesting in terms of this question of what training do you even need to deal with any of these things in the classroom. And we know currently there's not one teacher education program across North America that has a specific focus on helping developing children, that's required, developing children's social and emotional well-being and mental health. So that's an interesting thing, you know. So I think that needs definitely a more of a focus. But one of the things I have to say, and I go back to Mark's thing, so when we were going to bring this MindUP program, a mindfulness a program which incorporates lots of different things, I have to say. It's not just a mindful awareness program, into a school system, we were really cautious because we knew that school system had a focus on something called social responsibility. In British Columbia in 2001, the Ministry of Education identified the promotion of social responsibility on par with the promotion of reading, writing, and numeracy. So there's 4 performance standards: reading, writing, numeracy, social responsibility. And within social responsibility, there's things like solving problems in peaceful ways, contributing to classroom and school environment, defending human rights, practicing democratic rights and responsibilities. So what we did, and one of the things in thinking about the educational context and how it fits, is actually already identified how this program aligns with the school's mission, and then able to bring it in that way. So one thing that we find is it's so important to see how whatever program or whatever aligns with the school's mission already, rather than try and dump in one more thing for them to do.
That's good. I would just add to that I was also a lot stricter in the beginning because I really didn't know how to do this. And I still really don't know how to do this, to be honest with you. And because I think every school, what I'm finding is every school, every setting is different. And you really just have to be flexible to see where it's going to emerge in the setting that is open to it. And I found that the issues that were talked about over this weekend so far, like, do you start with the teacher? Do you start with the kids? Do you start with the parents? Those are very interesting issues. And I think that's probably not an either-or question, at least from my perspective. I think it's probably a both-and. I definitely do think that I agree that there needs to be some personal grounding and experience in what you're trying to teach, and according to the level of it, even more so. But I also think that there's something very, very good about giving something to, one learns what one teaches, or however that phrase goes. So there's some growth and development, and there's a real hook for teachers who want to give programs to kids, and it's a motivation for them as well. So I don't know, I think that's an empirical question too.
I mean, my sense of it is we'll talk about these programs, but that all of you really have some good questions. I'm guessing you really want to just start. So I'm feeling that some things will emerge when we start asking questions, and if there's things. Do you think that's right? Okay, I'm going to get up and, okay. So we're going to talk about the programs. There's 3 programs, as we mentioned: Inner Kids, MindUP, and Learning to Breathe. And we now are just going to give you 3 things about each one. The age group that's targeted, some of the objectives, and a little bit about what it encompasses.
So we're going to, again, we're going this way. So we're going to start with the Inner Kids program, much of which is in the book, The Mindful Child. And we call it the new ABCs. And the reason why we call it the new ABCs is because it's training 3 things. It's training attention, it's training emotional balance, and it's training compassion. So the Inner Kids program unabashedly tracks classical training. And one of the things I love about this conference, and that I love about being on this panel, is I think as this group emerges and evolves, as the field evolves, we are becoming more and more comfortable that all programs are not alike. And we're becoming more and more comfortable that we have our own area of expertise and our own niche in the development of what is really more in our own voice. So without any worry or fear at all, I'm very comfortable saying that the Inner Kids program tracks the 4 applications of mindfulness, which is classical Buddhist training. I am not a practicing Buddhist, although I do practice meditation, and I've been trained in that, and I'm also a lawyer, and so the program is secular. And I'm very comfortable with that, and I'm very comfortable explaining why I'm not worried about the fact that it tracks Buddhist training and why that still works in a secular setting. And classical Buddhist training trains 3 things. It trains ethics, it trains values, and it trains awareness. So those are the ABCs. ABCs, the A is attention or awareness. The B, it trains wisdom, it trains ethics or values, and it trains awareness. The B is the wisdom piece, and the C is the ethics piece. And so it completely tracks this classical training in that way. So I guess we can go to the next slide. And then we talk about what we define mindfulness as. And in the Inner Kids program, we define it as paying attention with kindness too. Now look at, it's really interesting as you start as you start to mirror these things. You know, we heard both Mark and Linda talk about intra and interpersonal relationship. This is straight from the 4 applications of mindfulness. It's secularized in this way, but it starts with me, right? That's the intra that Linda and Mark were talking about. We start with me, we focus, we learn about our bodies, our sensation, our breath, we move to our thoughts and emotions. Then in that whole area, there's a really nice area of research. I know it's that sexy brain research, but a nice area of research that supports the development of me and the development of attention. Then we move to other people and connection and connecting with other people. And in that, there's also emotional balance. And emotional balance, remember, was a lot of talk about using mindfulness to help balance emotions. But in the classical traditions, you need attention to regulate emotions. Attention is necessary. That's why it's taught sequentially. It doesn't mean that it's not co-taught some, but it's taught attention first because the attention is a necessary component of emotional regulation. And then to everyone and everything, so the attention then goes to everyone and everything with the ideas of everything's changing, nothing stays the same, interconnection that we heard a lot about this morning. And then lastly, what we talk about this mindfulness being is love with legs, which again dovetails with exactly what Mark was talking about last night, that all of this work on the cushion, all the work on the inner work is really made meaningful, especially when you work with kids, when it's taken out into real life, and that's why we call it love with legs. One of the things that I think is important, and Dan Siegel's work is really helping us with this, is the idea of how the inner part of your brain, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've read his books, the parts of your brain that light up when you're doing your inner work are the same parts of the brain that light up when you're in an attuned, connected relationship. So that's the Inner Kids program, very simply. It's targeted toward, I've taught pre-K through teen, but the manuals that are in development now and will be out soon are really pre-K through 5th, and then we'll continue to go. And great. I think that's it.
So now I'm going to talk about MindUP, but I want to say like I said before, I have been doing research on the MindUP, and I've been involved with the development of the program for the past 5-6 years, but actually Mark Meyer, who could raise his hand, raise your hand. He is the director, the educational program director for the MindUP, for the Hawn Foundation and MindUP. So he'll have more information. But just to tell you, so the MindUP curriculum goes from sort of preschool up to 8th grade. There's 3 different curriculum. It's actually now available from Scholastic. It's published on Scholastic. You could go on Amazon and order it from Scholastic. It comes with the poster. I think it's $24.99. $24.99, you order it. Now, mind you, I would say that you need training to do it. I wouldn't say you just order it and start doing it, but, you know, that's me. And the program.
Interrupt you for just a minute? I was just on the road and somebody came in and they had just gotten their MindUP package and they were so excited about that poster. They were so
They like the brain poster? It's very cool. That's great. So, so the thing is, I do want to say just a little bit about the development of the MindUP curriculum, and then I'll get to the lessons, is that it actually was evolved over 6 years. And so the program first started out as a mindfulness education program and was implemented. We did a pilot study of that time. We got lots of feedback from teachers and lots of information about fidelity. And the program has actually gone through 4 revisions, all based on feedback, both in terms of the feasibility for teachers, what they wanted in the lessons. And so it's been a really back and forth, the idea of really using a strong theoretical framework that comes from different disciplines, not just mindfulness, but also that it was so important to get the teachers buy-in. And I have to say, one of the things that we found is now teachers find it so easy to do, but Mark can tell you more. So next slide. So the MindUP program has 15 lessons that can be done throughout the school year, but it really focuses on a lot of the stuff that Mark Greenberg was talking about last night, because you first start with talking about neuroscience. So the one thing, and this is one thing that actually, so Goldie Hawn is behind she's the one that sort of was the catalyst for the development of this program, and she's really into neuroscience. So the program really takes a whole focus on neuroscience. So the children first learn about their brain, and then they learn about what happens to their brain when they do these mindfulness attention awareness practices. So it's very much like Susan's. The first focus is on yourself, so developing that inner awareness. There's 3 times a day that you do this breath practice, and then you do mindful tasting, mindful seeing, and so the focus is on the self, the sort of the inner, and then it starts focusing on others, perspective taking, learning optimism. They do a gratitude journal, and then it's about others, and they do random acts of kindness, and they actually, the final lesson is to come together as a class and do a community service learning project where they decide how to be mindful in their community. So it's really that inner to sort of thinking about other people to the world. And then you want to go to the last one. And I just, in terms of I guess there's it's neuroscience foundation, self-awareness, emotional control, social action. So in thinking about the theory of change, I just wanted to sort of give you, the focus is on thinking, learning about the brain, empowerment, the practicing, the daily practice. I have to reiterate this idea. Practice, practice, practice. Adele made that point, I think, that you need to actually have the daily practices. We don't know how many. I have to say empirically, we don't know, like, is it 2? Is it 5? Is it, how many times? But we just know repetition is critical. Learning the optimism and perspective taking, and then the idea of the doing for others. Anyway, so that's all about the MindUP. And then I'll go and do your slides for that.
Yeah, I don't think I have very many.
You have 2.
Oh, there you go. So the Learning to Breathe program has been, there are 2 versions of it now. It's based upon the acronym BREATHE. And there are 6 themes in the program that correspond to B, R, E, A, T, and H. The last E stands for empowerment, or gaining the inner edge. There are 2 versions, one for younger adolescents, it was piloted in 5th grade through middle school, and one for older adolescents. There are no delineating, defining, incriminating information of age-wise, grade-wise on the covers of either the manual or the workbook, so a teacher could use the younger version for older kids and vice versa. The themes are very elastic, and they parallel the themes of mindfulness-based stress reduction in the sense that B is listen, your body's trying to tell you something, and so we do practices related to the body. R stands for reflections or thoughts, so you start to use your mind to understand your thinking. E stands for emotions. A stands for attention to the body. Thoughts and emotions is good stress management. That's where we put some data about the brain and chronic stress and all that stuff. And then T is tenderness, take it as it is. And it's kind of a countercultural piece of advice. Be nice to yourself, have some self-compassion, and also extend that self-compassion or that compassion to other people. H is habits of a healthy mind, where we talk about how to generalize this and bring mindfulness into our daily life. So the younger version has 18 sessions for about 15 minutes each, and they're scripted with the exercises. There are lots of interactive things. The structure of each lesson incorporates a welcome and a short practice period, just a very, very small didactic presentation of where we're going in terms of perhaps some material. And then the middle portion is activity, interactive activity, group activity, not intended to be anywhere near any kind of therapeutic activity. It's normalizing. It's kind of just what people go through at this age. And then every session ends with some practice. There is a CD and posters and all that stuff. And those were some students doing a body scan meditation. And this is the mindful quilt activity from the 5th graders at Madison Metropolitan School District. It's what they learned. And then the quilt was put in the school hallway. So I think maybe we should open this up now and just raise questions. We can talk some more about these issues, or we can actually talk a little bit more about what we think we don't know, but let's just open it up and see if you have any specific questions.
I got 15, but I'll just say the one that it's a wonderful set of programs. It seems like one of the ethical considerations we had talked about at lunch is that if you think about Buddhism and any kind of mindfulness as the original psychology, you're more or less explicitly potentially asking teachers to become psychologists. That is, you do mindfulness, particularly with older kids, it's very natural that very strong emotional reactions could happen. Not that they're not happening in the classroom anyway, but they're going to be very much focused on, they may be elicited through some of this. And so there really does seem to be a blending of the roles of teacher and psychologist that could emerge, or therapist, or however you want to call that discipline, that would work with people who are not showing normal emotional experiences, but effects of trauma or explicit emotional suffering. And I don't know if that's being stated. I don't know if when teachers learn this, you say, hey, you're about to overlap. This is what I'm clinical. This is what I do. I did this for 20 years. You know, I have a lot of training in doing this. So I think at least we have to say that this is potentially where this goes. And I don't know if that feels like a lot to lay at the doorsteps of a teacher. It seems like it'd be very important to be clear on what we're trying to actually have happen with a mindfulness practice. What's our outcome for the kids? And to say that this is part of the experience, that there really is something clinical, trauma things can emerge, and are we stating that and preparing teachers for that too?
I think all of us probably. Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And it goes to the point that people need to be very well trained in order to teach this. It also goes to the question of whether you're having a full life skills class or social emotional class, or whether you're doing drop-ins of short activities, 3 to 5 minutes at a time. Not that serious and significant emotions won't come up in a drop-in activity, but you can calibrate a little bit what's going to happen. But what I will say, going back to this overall ethical consideration, is that there's a need for mindfulness facilitators to have two types of experience. One is mindfulness experience, but the other is classroom management or clinical skills or group facilitation skills. And what often happens in this emerging movement is that the same people don't necessarily have both. So there are great group facilitation programs that teach you how to facilitate a group. A lot of the SEL programs you'll see down in the marketplace, the council program back west, that help you with group facilitation without having to actually get a clinical degree. But you do get trained in group school-based facilitation to be able to better handle these things that come up. The other way of working with that is to work in pairs. There's often an aversion to working with two people, but I personally have gone into shelters and areas where I was concerned about a potential for flooding only with a therapist. So I love team teaching. You go in with another person and then you're able to support each other. So there are ways around it. It's just a matter of bringing it into awareness and, you know, going into it with some humility and taking, you know, appropriate steps to take good care.
And I have to say a couple of things. One is that in Vancouver, I'll just say in Vancouver at least, and how they've done it is the school counselors always get trained as well. So when there's a training for MindUP, the school counselor. And I have to say that this issue of bringing emotions up in the classroom is across any program. I've been working in the area of social emotional learning. I can tell you, just a few weeks ago, I was recruiting kids for a study. I went to kids, 5th grade, regular classroom in kind of a needy area. I said to you guys, oh, I'm doing this study, telling them all about it. I said, have any of you ever had stress? Like, what stresses kids out at this age? First child, just naively, just like totally, when my dad hits me. Second one, when my dad ties me to a chair when he doesn't like what I'm doing. That was just in 1 2-minute conversation of asking kids what stresses kids their age. So no matter what, it's going to be, so we just have to have support. So no matter, I do think teachers have to play a role. Teachers are the ones who often identify mental health problems. You know, they're often, even though they have no background or training, they are the ones who are with the kids, and so we have to give the supports to them. The other thing that's very interesting in this Durlack et al. Did a meta-analysis of over 200 social and emotional learning programs, and they found the programs that were most effective were teacher delivered. So that's another thing to think about, anyway, and thinking about those data.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a difficult issue. I think training of people, I would just second or third that's really the most important thing, so that people know and they're prepared and they can access resources if that needs to happen. I also think for a program like Learning to Breathe, it's really very relational. I mean, that's the idea. It's normative adolescent development related or relevant. It's not a place where people talk about their individual circumstances. That's just not the way it works, but it is a very safe space, and the whole orientation is very invitational. I think someone said that this morning. If you want to participate, fine, and if you don't, just don't disturb anyone else, you know. And over time, there is this safety that is developed, and then if something does come up, the community supports it. But there's always the need to possibly refer and all those things. Mm-hmm. Yes. Do we have?
I have two questions. The first is to Dr. Broderick. Could you speak to within adolescence itself, the stages of early, middle, and adolescence? Do you find that there's developmental kind of differences for those age groups?
That's a really good question. In fact, we've just been bandying this about with the 5th grade program. As you know, many people are thinking that adolescence, now early adolescence starts quite young, like 4th, 5th grade. So, or at least whatever they're calling it these days, it starts very young. So I think what I have seen is that there's probably a little bit there is a need to have shorter class periods, shorter practices, and perhaps a more explicit rollout of what this is all about. And I view this curriculum as a guided discovery curriculum. It's not direct instruction, and it's not just discovery learning where we just put you in a room and let you figure out the way your mind works. It's really guided, and it's guided through group activities, and I think that the logical, like the logic model, so to speak, needs to be more clearly explicated for the younger kids. And there probably needs to be more emphasis on labeling emotions and identifying emotions, although I have to say, even older kids and even some students that I've had at university are not so good at identifying their emotions. So I think we're all quite young, developmentally delayed or whatever at that particular process. But that's the way I've approached it, and I think that the older kids can do with a little bit less than that, and they can do with a little bit longer practice. I don't think none of my students or the kids don't practice very much outside of the program. I mean, that just doesn't happen. I do give them CDs, but it's not like regular homework. But recently, well, the dissertation that's just going to be defended showed that homework didn't really matter in terms of the outcome. So practice doesn't really matter, at least in this particular study.
Yeah, and my second question is for Susan Kaiser Greenland.
I was just going to make one comment. The one thing that we don't know is we really don't know what the role of development is in mindfulness programs. I have to say there's so little research about what program is appropriate for whom, under what context, at what developmental stage. That whole issue Mark brought up about the temperament fit, some programs for some kids, and we yet don't know what a 5-year-old program would, really be appropriate, and what the underlying mechanisms might be that lead to these outcomes. So I just have to throw that in, like we just don't know enough.
Let me jump on that, and then I know there's another question. One of the things that has really come up for me in this conference that I think is fascinating and is a wonderful challenge for all of us is to be able to talk about mindfulness and to have confidence that we can talk about mindfulness in a more nuanced way. Because what we're hearing from the researchers is that there's not enough research yet. Yet we're also having sessions on how are we selling this thing. So right there you've got a conflict. How are we selling something that the researchers are telling us there's not enough research yet? And it's an inherent conflict that's coming up on all the panels. And what I would propose is that we are able to hold those two things at the same time, because there is some research out there, and there's also adult research that we can consider to be something we can at least look at as a parallel research. And we're not going to get to the point that we can figure out these answers without having some implementation. So we really need to be able to have a nuanced, non-defensive discussion about this, understanding that the research is limited, but the only way we're going to get to the other side is by doing work in a responsible way, and as Jerry, I think, said this morning, not over-promising. Because I'm in a lot of schools and I'm in a lot of community, over-promising is just going to kill us. But we can do both. We can continue to research, we can tell people the truth, and we will get people who will buy in and want us to go in and continue to develop the programs. And I think we have to start thinking about this in a more nuanced way. I'm pretty sure everybody agrees. Yeah. Yes.
My second question is, I live in a very Christian city, and how you have, as someone with legal background, formulated something that seems very Buddhist into secular language.
Well, to give you an idea, my book is being translated in Spanish. The Spanish language rights were bought by the Catholic Church. So they happen to think that mindfulness is from their tradition. So there are universal, which at first I was a little worried about. I thought, oh no, and then I thought, hey, this is great. So these are universal truths. And the Buddhist piece of it is that the Buddhists have formulated a very specific form of mental training over a course of a couple thousand years. And that has been secularized about 30 years ago for adults, and it's been very well researched. And the research findings for adults have been fantastic, and it's been widely adopted in secular hospitals and schools and universities. So by using that, but there's no doubt about it, MBSR tracks classical training. So by using that as our precedent, as Jerry was talking about precedent, we can in the same way just talk about tracking this particular form of training that does offer universal values in the way that the adult program has been secularized without being afraid of the Buddhist piece. I think the big problem with the Buddhist piece is people are afraid of it, so they're tiptoeing around it. We don't need to be afraid of it. These are not Buddhist programs. The values that are taught are universal values. The training that's taught, lots of these elements show up everywhere.
I'm just going to give you an example where there was a potential lawsuit. So in Canada, you know, we're pretty open, but in one of the districts in which the MindUP, I was actually doing research in this district, and MindUP was being implemented very widely, bought in, and I have to say the way it was integrated was from buy-in from the grassroots to the teacher to the district administration, really, really supporting it, really believing it, seeing how many of their teachers really bought in and loved it, and had two sets of parents at one school who their children just started kindergarten. The teacher was implementing MindUP, and so they then started to get all the other parents involved to try and bring a lawsuit against the school district. They brought the news media on board. They had me come speak, and they had the news media out there. They went on a talk show in the morning, and they had to meet with the lawyer of the school district with their lawyer, kind of thing. And it's very interesting. So what came out of that? It could have put the kibosh. It could have immediately eliminated that program ever happening any place, and you know, really quite widely. But what happened is that first of all, the lawyer really looked at the whatever that bill was about this and said it fell totally with this program MindUP, fell within the BC School Act. It was not breaking up anything. Now the school district could have still said it's not worth the effort, but because the assistant superintendent went on the radio show against these parents who were talking and said, this is a program that we have research on now. I mean, that was a really important piece, that they had research being done on the program, that they showed their teacher support, that they came out then and supported the program and said, no, we believe that. And in the talk show, very interestingly, just as an aside, they had, of course, a controversial call-in. They had all these callers in. Every single one that called in, every single person said, I wish I had this for my children. I wish I would have had this as a child. So it was... it was the lawsuit is bringing Buddhism into the schools. So it was not separation of church and state. Yeah, sorry, so it was that dealing with this issue of Buddhism and that. Because they, of course, the parents went and Googled Goldie Hawn and find out that she, you know, so there are all sorts of things that came up, even just having that. But it was very interesting. It was a very good resolution. I'm sure there's things that have turned out bad, but if that school district wasn't bought in, if those relationships weren't formed, if there hadn't been research going on, if the teachers, it would have been dead.
And just quickly, psychology is awash in this too. I mean, so Western psychology, DBT, ACT, all those different treatments are looking at mindfulness as a very powerful healing process. And then also the neuroplasticity is always a good one to yeah, well, you know, you become what you practice, essentially. Anybody else?
Terrible with microphones. Okay. So as a researcher, whenever I'm looking at a new intervention program, one of the things that, at least for me, immediately pops into my mind is what are the active ingredients involved in the program itself, and kind of the issue of what aspects of the program need to be implemented with fidelity and high degree of integrity in order to get an intervention effect, and what aspects of the program might be adapted, or it actually might be recommended to adapt those elements of the program specific to the context. And so I was wondering if the panelists could comment on their particular program and what aspects are really essential to implement with integrity and what aspects they would perhaps think could be adapted or maybe would recommend others would adapt to the context.
I can start just because that is my burning question. That is exactly, I don't have the answers. The whole issue of fidelity, of the idea of, like, do you need the three? So what we do is we actually have a diary. I'm doing all the research. So we have a diary, a weekly diary of implementation that is easy to use for the teachers, because we want to know how many times a day do they actually do the breathing, the attention, how much do they do the lessons. And I have to say, what happened from our first study is we found that the teachers did the breathing and not so much the lessons. And you know why they did the breathing? This is very interesting. The reason they did the breathing and they were so regular on that is because they noticed a very quick change in children's behavior. They saw changes in their children's behavior, and this is anecdotal, these are the stories, but they said, you know, I would notice them. They would come in here, kids would be asking for, can we do it? They'd have a note back from the music teacher saying, you know, when they sent them off to music, your students came so ready to learn. So I don't know if that's an active ingredient, but can I tell you if whether the acts of kindness versus the learned optimism versus the community engagement led to the outcomes that we've seen so far? I can't tell you because we haven't dismantled the intervention to see what is the active ingredient. So it's just kind of like, let's put all these things we think work, but to monitor fidelity, implementation fidelity very, very closely, and to get not only teachers' buy-in and perspectives and experiences, but the children. And I have to emphasize that so much that we often leave children out of any evaluation when we try and figure out, we need to ask them what worked for you, what didn't, and modify accordingly and see how that works.
I'm not a researcher, although my program's been researched and I was involved with it, but I can tell you as a trainer what's important to me. What's important to me is that the teachers who are facilitating this know both the theory and the practice. So the teachers really need to know what the practice is, why they're using it, and when. That's what I see a lot of. People are doing practices that they've gotten here and there, but they don't really understand what the purpose is and what the end result is. So that's important, and the sequence in which they're taught, because there is a sequence that basically builds upon the other. As far as the actual practices, I don't think, for me, the ones that have been truly the most, I personally have seen the greatest effect, and certainly they were a very big part of the research we did, are sensory awareness practices, which include breathing. Breathing is a sensory awareness practice, but then also the awareness of the sound, or really when you are upset, when you're feeling overexcited or upset or distracted, being able to notice that, but then shift your attention gently and with curiosity and with kindness to a sensory experience as a way of settling and self-regulating. So those are the two things that come to my mind. I'm sure if we were doing research, a lot more would seem very important, but those are the two that come to mind.
And I really don't know either, but I'm thinking about what students say as a good measure for what they think is important, and what is the overwhelmingly most common response is, I learned that I can let go of distressing thoughts and emotions, and that sometimes that's a good thing to do. And one student said it best. She said, I learned I could have space in my mind. So I think I wouldn't put a lot of stock in the specific activities or the scripts or any of that, but leading them through or into a safe space and sharing that with them and allowing them to actually reduce the anxiety to a point where they can perhaps see what those thoughts are and how troubling they can be, and then giving them the permission to just try to let it go and come back to the breath. That seems to be very key. And then another one I found that's very, very powerful is the loving kindness. Very powerful. Because people are very hard on themselves, and kids are no different.
Hi.
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay. So related to the question that you just answered, I heard you all answering in terms of the curriculum implementation and what practices or curriculum were most important, another aspect to how effective the work is, which I think you're all aware of but didn't mention, is how it's presented, and whether that's actually more important than what's being presented, that the person presenting the curriculum come from a place of not requiring the students to be different than they are, a place of unconditional acceptance, and I'm curious to hear your comments on that.
It's very interesting. Again, I'm going to say it's an empirical question, because I think right now with the MindUP program and the research we've done so far is we really haven't made any requirements of like, fill out this application form, we'll let you know if you can do the MindUP training kind of thing. And the research really, we've so far brought in people with a lot of different backgrounds, some who maybe do yoga, maybe had some mindfulness, some not at all, and we haven't found any differential effects in terms of the outcomes for the person delivering it. Now, that being said, we haven't had enough research studies, we haven't had large enough sample sizes, and on and on and on, and to really explore that question. But I was thinking back to this question, and I keep on thinking about it, because what we're doing right now, we're doing a study looking at MindUP and the SMART in education, and we've randomly assigned teachers, 4th to 7th grade, to either do the SMART in education, which is a mindfulness program based on MBSR, really. It's a 22-hour program for themselves. So we've randomly assigned teachers to do that, teachers to do the SMART program, and then do the MindUP get trained in MindUP and do that with their classroom. Then to do only the SMART, so the SMART only, SMART plus MindUP, MindUP only, and then a treatment as usual, to see if there are differential effects if the teacher goes through a program. But what's so fascinating is we've been doing recruitment for this SMART in education, and it's been hard because the teachers who've been trained in MindUP all want to do the SMART program now. So there might be different pathways. So it might be that teachers they come up, one day training, come and learn how to help your children, help your students, and then for them, they learn so much, and then they want to go deeper into it. So I don't know what the pathway is, and maybe it's different for different people, because now they're all wanting to get the SMART training. Anyway, it's just, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that we need to know more.
Yeah, I mean, again, the research is, there's the research and then there's the anecdotal stories and what we see. And we also don't really know whether the research measures we're using are capturing what this other transformational effect is. But what I would say is that, again, going back to theory plus practice, because you're talking about embodiment, and embodiment is important, but there's another piece that's important too, which is how the teacher responds to the questions that are being asked him or her, or how the teacher responds to the situation that's in front of him or her. And that response, if it's not consistent with the underlying key concepts of mindfulness, everything changes, nothing lasts, nothing stays the same, we're all connected in some way. There are many, trying to look at things with a beginner's mind. If the teacher doesn't understand those concepts, he or she's not going to be facilitating the conversation in that way, and he and she is not going to be able to respond in a way that's consistent with those concepts. So again, I just cannot emphasize enough the importance of not just the practice, but the theory plus practice, which isn't just on the cushion. It includes relational mindfulness, it includes mindfulness out in the world, mindfulness in everyday life.
So our time is up. Should we call it a day now, or are there any other questions?
We're going to be around more about the program. Oh, can go learn more about the program. So thank you so much for coming and for being interested in this. Thanks.